My name is David Leland, and I'm the writer and director of the film Wish You Were Here, which we made in 1987. Wish You Were Here started its life as being a draft of a film called Personal Services, which was about the heroic life of Cynthia Payne, who ran a knocking shop from her house in Streatham and went to jail for the privilege. So I started the first 20 pages of Wish You Were Here. Was intended to be the beginning of what became Personal Services. And I started with childhood, with a character who I thought would turn into Cynthia as a child. But after 20 pages, I talked to Margaret Matheson, who was the exec producer, and said, well, I'm going to be 100 pages in before she's on the game. And we decided at that point that I should abandon that idea and start with the character that was Cynthia Payne in the film when she was a grown-up. And we agreed that I should abandon that. But what I actually did, I was on a kind of roll with that script, so I wrote it very quickly. At that point, it became, I think, a film which is much more than simply Cynthia Payne's childhood. There are lots of elements in the film that relate to Cynthia. She lost her mother when she was young, which is in the film. Linda, the character in the film, loses her mother. And scenes like, there's this wonderful scene with Heathcote Williams as a psychiatrist who tries to get her to say rude words, and she knows exactly what the rude words are but refuses to say them. And there's a certain sense of that the psychiatrist is getting some kind of frisson out of that. So those all related to Cynthia and her past. But as I wrote it, the film, I think, is as much, if not more, about my own childhood. And one of the things I have in common with Cynthia was we were both raised and brought up in very small, enclosed communities. I was brought up in a village. I'm a village boy. And there is a sense in those communities that becoming, for example, becoming an actor for me really was an act of escaping over the invisible wall and breaking into a different way of life, because there's something very oppressive about. There can be, culturally, something very oppressive about those kind of communities, particularly in the late 50s and the 60s. And Wish You Were Here is placed in 1951. Which I think was after the war, which bred a lot of freedom in a lot of people. They say, oh, the war was the good old days. I think the reason people said that was because there was a lot of freedom. People did make hay during the war. There was a lot of anarchy, and the classes mixed in a way they'd never mixed before. And I think the 50s became very repressive in terms. People were made to be very materialistically ambitious, so get your nose down, get back to work, build the nation. And I think there was a very repressive, emotional and sexual environment. So I think I was drawing on a lot of all of that, what I felt about that, or what I'd experienced about that, and a sense of kind of a claustrophobic sense that I'd spend a lot of time trying to shake off from my own background. And part of writing Wish You Were Here was me coming to terms with that and understanding that, I think. In hindsight, I think that. Also, there was the image of Linda riding on her bike at the beginning of Wish You Were Here. Taken directly from a girl, this blonde girl who used to ride around the village green on her bike with the wind blowing her skirt up and all the boys whistling at her as she went by because she knew she was showing her knickers and all that. But regular as clockwork, this girl would come around the green summer evening. You show all of that. So I was in Wish You Were Here, I was tapping into a lot of all of that. And I felt that any young woman who had lost her mother, that what happens to Linda, she's lost her mother and is really being brought up under the shadow of a very male-dominated society, part of a community, and all of the values that they have, which is expressed through the men, and also the duality of their morality. I think that in terms of the mores of the time and the morality of the film, as is portrayed in the film, that a young girl having a baby, having an illegitimate baby, was a total taboo. They were often sent away to live somewhere else while they had their babies, girls who fallen girls. And I think that at the end of the film, that scene where she pushes the baby across the bowling green and says, "Yes, it's mine, all mine," is an important statement. What I felt at that time about that particular period of time was to stand against all of that oppressiveness that exists within enclosed communities. The film became related to Cynthia, and I was always quite happy that it was, but I'd be denying a lot of my own background and my own past, and also a lot of the experiences of other women of that generation that I talked to, and found that they had gone through things when they were teenagers in the 50s that they'd never talked about. But when I talked to them, they were quite liberated by the fact that to be able to say, "I'd never told anybody that before, I'd never talked about that kind of thing before." I certainly didn't look back on that period with any kind of nostalgia at all. I always looked back on it with a distinct lack of ease, I think because of my own childhood and remembering what my own childhood was like in the late 50s. I didn't like it at all. I found it difficult, for example, to look at family photographs and all of that, which have a very powerful sense of nostalgia to them. And I think that part of writing and making the film, I was dealing with that sense of discomfort in myself. But nobody ever criticised it for that. I think the fact that it has lasted and that people still want to see the film and people still talk about the film, apart from a couple of catchphrases in the film, is because it took a very unnostalgic look at that particular period of time and of the morality of that time, of the mores of that time, and the contradictions. I like writing about contradictions. Which is what people tend to talk about, that element. I think that's what's helped it survive. Although it is great sometimes when you're out and about. I actually have heard people refer to Singapore as Singapore, which is how she refers to it in one of the final scenes in the film. And also there's a scene where she dances around in her nightdress in the garden singing "Up Your Bum, and I've heard people singing that too. I'm not sure whether I should be proud of that or not.